Imagine waking up in one of the most famous cities in the world. Today, people travel from across the globe to see the lights, the art, and the romance of Paris. They imagine quiet cafes, beautiful streets, and elegant buildings. But 500 years ago, Paris was a very different place. The city was crowded, filthy, and often terrifying. The streets were narrow and dark. Waste flowed through the roads. And when night fell, people avoided walking alone. Welcome to Paris during the Renaissance, a time that historians often describe as a golden age of art and learning. But for ordinary people living in the city, life was anything but golden. In fact, for many residents, surviving each day in Renaissance Paris was a struggle. To understand why, we need to step into the streets of the city around the 1500s. At this time, Paris was already one of the largest cities in Europe. Its population had grown rapidly over the centuries. Thousands of people moved into the city looking for work, trade, and opportunity. But the city was never designed to hold so many people. Homes were packed tightly together. Buildings leaned over the narrow streets. In some areas, houses were so close that neighbors could nearly touch each other's windows. Sunlight barely reached the ground. And with so many people living close together, the streets quickly became chaotic. Markets filled the city with noise. Merchants shouted to attract customers. Carts rolled over the uneven stone roads. Horses pulled wagons through crowds of people. From sunrise to sunset, the city was alive with movement. But beneath this energy was a serious problem. Paris had almost no proper sanitation system. Most homes had no plumbing. There were no underground sewage networks like the ones modern cities have today. Instead, people dealt with waste in the simplest way possible. They threw it out of their windows. Every day, residents dumped garbage, dirty water, and human waste directly into the streets below. Over time, these streets turned into muddy channels filled with filth. When it rained, the waste mixed with water and spread everywhere. When the weather was dry, the smell hung in the air. Travelers visiting Paris often wrote about how terrible the city smelled, and they were not exaggerating. Imagine walking through a crowded street while trying to avoid puddles of sewage. Imagine the smell of rotting food and animal waste mixing with smoke from hundreds of fireplaces. For many people living in Paris, this was simply daily life. But sanitation problems were not the only danger. Crowded cities often attract crime, and Renaissance Paris was no exception. At night, the streets became far more dangerous. Most areas had very little lighting. Only a few lanterns illuminated the darker neighborhoods. In many streets, darkness completely covered the alleys. This gave criminals the perfect opportunity to hide. Pickpockets and thieves operated throughout the city. Some gangs controlled entire areas. Travelers were warned not to walk alone after dark. Even locals tried to finish their business before nightfall. Because once the sun disappeared, the risks increased dramatically. If someone attacked you in a quiet street, help might be far away. City guards existed, but they were few in number, and Paris was too large for them to patrol every corner. This meant ordinary citizens often had to rely on themselves for protection. Some people carried knives or sticks when traveling through dangerous neighborhoods. Others simply avoided those areas completely. Crime was only one of many problems caused by overcrowding. Disease was another. Without sanitation, disease spread easily through the population. The dirty streets became breeding grounds for bacteria and pests. Rats and insects thrived in the waste. Food spoiled quickly in the warm months. And contaminated water made illness common. Outbreaks of disease appeared regularly in the city. Some of these illnesses were mild. Others were deadly. During this period, Europe had already experienced the devastating impact of the Black Death, which had killed millions of people. Although that pandemic occurred earlier, the fear of disease never disappeared. Residents of crowded cities like Paris knew how quickly illness could spread. And because medical knowledge was limited, treatments were often ineffective. Doctors did their best, but many diseases remained mysterious. For poor citizens, healthcare was even harder to access. And this brings us to another reality of Renaissance Paris. The city was deeply divided between rich and poor. Wealthy nobles and powerful officials lived in large houses or elegant residences. These homes were often located in the better parts of the city. They had larger rooms, cleaner environments, and servants to manage daily life. But most citizens were not wealthy. Many lived in small apartments or crowded buildings. Entire families sometimes shared a single room. Conditions in these neighborhoods could be extremely difficult. Food was not always guaranteed. Work was unpredictable, and living spaces were cramped. For these people, the beauty and culture of the Renaissance meant little. Their lives were focused on survival. Yet despite these hardships, the city continued to grow. Paris was an important center of trade and culture. Merchants from across Europe visited the city. Scholars studied at the famous University of Paris. Artists and thinkers helped shape the intellectual world of the Renaissance. This created a strange contrast. On one side of the city, ideas about art, philosophy, and science were transforming Europe. On the other side, ordinary citizens were struggling with poverty, disease, and crime. The Renaissance is often remembered as a period of beauty and progress, and in many ways it was. But history is rarely simple. For every palace and cathedral built during this era, there were thousands of people living in harsh conditions nearby. Cities like Paris were both inspiring and brutal. They offered opportunity, but they also demanded resilience. Living there required constant awareness of the dangers around you. You had to watch where you walked. You had to protect your belongings. And you had to hope that disease would not reach your home. Yet somehow, people continued to build lives in this environment. Markets thrived, families raised children, and communities formed within the crowded streets. Human societies have always shown a remarkable ability to adapt. Over the centuries, Paris slowly improved. Urban planning evolved. Sanitation systems were built. Streets were widened and cleaned. The city gradually transformed into the place we recognize today. Modern Paris is known for its beauty, culture, and architecture. Millions of tourists visit every year. They admire the historic buildings, the art museums, and the elegant boulevards. But few of them realize how different the city once was. 500 years ago, the same streets were far darker and far more dangerous. Life in Renaissance Paris was not the romantic dream people imagine today. For most residents, it was a daily challenge. And surviving in one of Europe's greatest cities required courage, endurance, and a bit of luck. So the next time someone describes the Renaissance as a golden age, remember this. For kings, nobles, and artists, it may have been. But for the ordinary people walking the crowded streets of Paris, life was often much harder than we think.